My mother stood before 60 guests, raising her champagne glass to toast 20 years of marriage. Yet her eyes were locked on me with pure disdain. She smiled that perfect, practiced smile and called me a freeloader loud enough for the waiters to hear. My stepfather laughed, asking if I had borrowed money from my husband just to buy their gift. I did not cry. I just placed the box on the table and prepared to silence the room. My name is Clara Watson, and standing in the center of the grand ballroom at the Lakeview Hills Country Club. I looked like everything my mother had told these people I was not. The invitation stated that the celebration would begin at 7 o'clock in the evening. I walked through the double mahogany doors at 7 o'clock sharp. In the world of forensic accounting, precision is not a suggestion, it is a requirement. It was a habit I had cultivated over 10 years of rebuilding a life that the two people standing at the head table had tried very hard to dismantle. The room smelled of expensive lilies, roasted prime rib, and the distinct, metallic scent of old money mixing with desperate new debt. Crystal chandeliers, likely rented for the evening given what I knew about my stepfather's current liquidity problems, cast a golden, forgiving light over the 60 guests. These were the elites of North Carolina, or at least, the people who desperately wanted to be perceived as such. They were the members of the board, the golf partners, the women who ran the charity auctions, and they were the audience for the play my mother, Marlene Watson Halloway, had been directing for the better part of a decade. I wore a charcoal silk slip dress under a structured blazer that cost more than my first car. There were no logos, no flashing brand names, just the quiet, undeniable weight of quality. My hair was pulled back into a severe, polished knot. I wore no jewelry except for my wedding band. Beside me, Ruben Ruiz moved with the easy grace of a man who has nothing to prove. He stayed a half step behind me, not out of subservience, but out of a profound respect for the battlefield I was stepping onto. He knew this was my war. He was just the heavy artillery waiting in reserve. As we moved deeper into the room, the ambient chatter dipped in volume, rippling outward from the entrance like a stone dropped in a pond. I did not need to look around to know they were whispering. I could feel the weight of their eyes, heavy with judgment and scripted pity. "That is her," a woman in a heavy velvet gown murmured behind her champagne flute, not nearly as quietly as she thought. "The daughter. I thought she was still in trouble with the law," a man replied. "Or was it drugs Marlene said she dropped out of college because she could not handle the pressure?" "Ruben Ruiz is the one holding her up," the woman whispered back. "Poor man. Imagine taking on a burden like that, a pretty face, but absolutely zero ambition, a total freeloader." Freeloader. The word hung in the air, invisible and toxic. It was the brand my mother had seared onto my reputation the moment I left her house. For 10 years, she had painted a portrait of me as the prodigal daughter, the ungrateful leech who had drained her resources and broken her heart, while she and her new husband, Grant Halloway, played the roles of long-suffering saints. It was a brilliant cover story. It explained why I never visited. It explained why they never spoke about my career. It garnered them sympathy and insulated them from questions about where exactly my father's life insurance money had gone. I kept my chin high, my expression neutral. I did not engage. I did not defend myself. In my line of work, you do not argue with the data until you are ready to present the full report. And tonight, I was finally ready to present the report. Marlene and Grant were holding court near the 3-tiered anniversary cake. My mother looked radiant in a silver sequined gown that hugged a figure she maintained with ruthless discipline. She was laughing at something the mayor was saying, her head thrown back, her hand resting possessively on Grant's forearm. Grant stood stiffly, his smile tight. He was a large man who used to look imposing. But tonight, under the harsh lights, he looked frayed. His tuxedo was expensive, but he kept checking his watch, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. When we approached the table, the circle of sycophants parted, sensing the sudden drop in barometric pressure. "Mother," I said. My voice was calm, carrying over the low hum of the jazz quartet playing in the corner. Grant, happy 20th anniversary. Marlene stopped laughing. She turned her gaze toward me, and the warmth instantly evaporated from her eyes, replaced by a cold, flat assessment. She did not step forward to hug me. She did not reach for my hand. She simply gave a sharp, regal nod, the kind one might give to a caterer who had arrived late. Clara, she said, you came. It is a milestone, I replied. I would not have missed it. Grant looked at me with open hostility. He swirled the scotch in his glass, his eyes darting to Reuben and then back to me. He looked like a man watching a perimeter alarm go off. We did not think you could afford the flight. Clara, or did Reuben pay for the tickets again? Reuben shifted his weight. It was a subtle movement, a tightening of his shoulders, but I placed a hand on his arm to steady him. Grant wanted a scene. He wanted the volatile, emotional Clara he had invented in his stories. I would not give him the satisfaction. We drove, I said simply. It is a lovely party, Grant. I reached into the tote bag I was carrying and pulled out the box. It was not a large box, perhaps the size of a standard hardbound book. Wrapped in matte black paper and tied with a thick, silver satin ribbon, it looked elegant, mysterious, and expensive. I placed it on the white tablecloth, right between the untouched centerpiece of orchids and Grant's half-empty glass of scotch. The thud it made was soft, but in the sudden silence of the immediate vicinity, it sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. Grant stared at the box. He let out a short, derisive bark of laughter. What is this, a peace offering? He looked around at the guests nearby, inviting them into the joke. Look at this. Everyone. Clara brought a gift. Tell me, Clara, where did you get the money for this? Did you save up your allowance from Reuben? Or did you find another credit card to max out in my name? The guests chuckled nervously. It was cruel, but they were used to this dynamic. They had been conditioned to view Grant's cruelty as tough love for a wayward child. I did not flinch. It is just a gift, Grant. Open it whenever you like. Marlene's eyes narrowed. She was sharper than Grant, more attuned to the nuances of social warfare. She sensed something was wrong. The Clara standing in front of her was not the weeping 22-year-old she had kicked out of the house. The Clara standing in front of her was wearing a blazer that cost more than the catering for this entire event, and she was looking at them with eyes that were dead calm. Marlene decided to regain control the only way she knew how, by escalating the narrative. She picked up a spoon and tapped it against her champagne flute. The sharp ting-ting-ting cut through the room. The jazz quartet stopped playing. Conversations died down. 60 faces turned toward the head table. Everyone, please, Marlene said, her voice projecting with the practiced modulation of a woman who loved the sound of her own martyrdom. She gestured to me with her glass, a movement that looked inclusive, but felt like an indictment. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge my daughter, Clara, for being here tonight. There was a smattering of polite applause. Marlene smiled, a sad, brave little smile. We all know the struggles we have had, she continued, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was perfectly audible in the back of the room. We all know the pain of watching a child lose their way. Grant and I have tried so hard. We have paid the debts. We have covered the mistakes. We have spent nights worrying when Clara would finally stand on her own 2 feet. I stood perfectly still. I could feel Reuben's heat beside me, a furnace of suppressed rage. I kept my hands clasped loosely in front of me. Marlene took a sip of champagne, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the glass. But that is what family does, she said, her voice rising again, inviting the room to marvel at her generosity. We carry the heavy loads. We support the ones who cannot support themselves, even when they are. She paused for effect, searching for the word that would do the most damage while sounding the most benevolent. Even when they are permanent guests in the lives of others, even when they are freeloaders, the word landed with physical force, A few guests gasped softly. Grant smirked, taking a sip of his drink. Looking at me with a triumphant sneer, he leaned forward, his voice booming in the quiet room. "She is right, Clara. We do not need your cheap gift. We do not need anything from you except for you to stop draining the people around you. God knows how Reuben puts up with it. A woman nearly 32 years old who cannot survive without a handout." The silence that followed was absolute. This was public humiliation. This was a social execution. They expected me to cry. They expected me to scream. They expected the unstable, broken girl from the stories to storm out of the room, proving them right. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile I wore when I found a hidden offshore account in a messy divorce proceeding. It was the smile of a hunter who sees the trap snap shut. "You are right, Mother," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was projected from the diaphragm, clear and steady, reaching every corner of the room without a microphone. Family should not keep secrets, and family should certainly not be a burden. I reached out and rested my hand on the black box. "So," I continued, "to avoid any awkwardness, and to prove that I am no longer the burden you say I am, I think it is best if I open this gift right here, in front of everyone." Marlene's smile faltered. The color drained slightly from her face. She looked at the box, really looked at it, and for the first time, she saw the lack of joy in its presentation. She saw the stark, legalistic precision of the wrapping. "That is not necessary," Marlene said, her voice sharpening. "Clara, do not make a scene." "Oh, I think a scene is exactly what we need," I said. I hooked my finger under the silver ribbon. "Grant asked where I got the money," I said, looking directly at my stepfather. "He asked if I borrowed it. It is a fair question. Financial transparency is so important. Do you not agree?" Grant's smirk vanished. He set his glass down, hard. "Do not touch that," he snapped. "Marlene, take it." Marlene lunged forward, her manicured claws reaching for the box. "Give me that." Reuben stepped forward. He did not touch her. He simply moved one half step into the space between me and the table, blocking her path with his shoulder. He looked at Grant, his face a mask of stone. "Let her open the box," Reuben said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder that promised violence if provoked. "She is not the one being controlled." "Grant, not anymore," Marlene recoiled, looking at the guests, trying to salvage the moment. "She is unstable. She is trying to ruin our evening." "I am just opening a gift." "Mother," I said, "why are you so afraid of a gift?" The room was frozen. The waiters had stopped serving. The jazz musicians were watching with wide eyes. Every single person in that ballroom was leaning forward, the air thick with the electricity of impending disaster. They had come for a celebration, but they were staying for the wreckage. I pulled the ribbon. It unspooled with a silken hiss, pooling on the white tablecloth like a snake. I lifted the lid of the box. Time seemed to suspend itself. I could see the sweat beading on Grant's forehead. I could see the vein pulsing in Marlene's neck. I could see the confusion and the thrill in the eyes of the 60 strangers who had judged me based on a fiction. My hand did not shake. My heart did not race. I was entirely, terrifyingly calm. To understand why I was so calm, you have to understand that this box did not just contain paper. It contained a decade of silence. To understand why I could stand there and destroy my own mother's reputation without blinking, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the day the ledger of our family finally broke. You have to go back to the day I realized my mother loved her reflection more than she loved her own flesh and blood. 12 years ago. The air in our house did not smell of expensive lilies or roasted prime rib. It smelled of soldering iron smoke, Old Spice, and the heavy, industrial scent of dust that clung to my father's work boots. Paul Watson was not a man who commanded ballrooms. He was a union electrician who believed that the integrity of a circuit was a moral issue. He was a man of quiet, rhythmic discipline. Every morning at 5:30, the coffee pot would hiss. Every evening at 6, his truck would rumble into the driveway. He loved me with a stillness that I only appreciated after it was gone. He did not buy me silk dresses. He taught me how to change a tire, how to balance a checkbook, and how to look a person in the eye when you shook their hand. He was the ground beneath my feet, and then, on a Tuesday in November, the ground simply vanished. It was an industrial accident. That was the phrase the company representatives used when they sat on our worn velvet sofa, wringing their soft hands, a fall from a height, a safety harness failure. It was quick, they said, as if the speed of his death was a consolation prize for the fact that he was never coming home to finish the coffee he had left on the counter. I was 22 years old, just months away from graduating college. I sat in the corner of the living room, feeling like a ghost in my own life. Watching my mother, Marlene was magnificent in her grief. That is the only word for it. She wore black like it was a couture choice. She wept into handkerchiefs with a delicate, trembling grace that made the neighbors want to cook casseroles and write checks. At the funeral, she threw herself onto the casket, a moment of theatrical devastation that made everyone look away in respectful discomfort. Everyone except me. I was watching her hands. They were gripping the wood. Yes, but her knuckles were not white. Her grip was not desperate. It was possessive. It looked less like she was holding on to a lost love and more like she was staking a claim on an asset. The settlement offer came 2 weeks later. The company wanted to avoid a lawsuit. They offered a payout that sounded like a fortune to a family that had always clipped coupons. $750,000, plus the life insurance policy my father had meticulously paid into for 20 years. It was enough to pay off the mortgage, cover my graduate school tuition, and leave Marlene comfortable for the rest of her life. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, reading the document. The legalese was dense, but the numbers were clear. "This is it, Mom," I said, my voice thick with the exhaustion of grief. "Dad made sure we would be okay." Marlene took the papers from me. She did not look at the numbers. She looked through them, staring at a future I could not see. "Yes," she whispered. "He did." That was the last time we spoke about the money as a shared resource. The erasure of Paul Watson began the day after the check cleared. It did not happen all at once. It was a slow, methodical scrubbing. It started with his clothes. I came home from a shift at the library to find his closet empty, not packed away in boxes for storage, but gone. "I gave them to Goodwill," Marlene said, not looking up from her magazine. "It is bad luck to keep a dead man's things. Clara, we need to move forward." I felt a spike of panic. "What about his watch, the Seiko he wore every day?" "Sold it," she said. "The pawn shop on 4th Street gave me $200 for it." I stared at her. My father's watch was not expensive, but it was him. It was the pulse on his wrist. "You sold it, Mom. I would have bought it from you. Why would you sell it?" "We need the cash flow. Clara, funerals are expensive." That was a lie. The funeral had been paid for by the union, but I did not argue. I was too stunned by the casual brutality of it. Then his books disappeared. Then the old recliner he sat in to watch football. Then the framed photos in the hallway were replaced with generic landscape prints she bought at a department store. It was as if she was curating a stage set, removing any prop that did not fit the new narrative. The unease in my gut turned into a cold, hard knot one night about a month after the funeral. I woke up at 2 a.m. to get a glass of water. As I passed the living room, I heard Marlene's voice. She was on the landline. The cord stretched taut as she paced the room. Her voice was low, but in the silence of the house, it carried perfectly. "The money is safe," she was saying. "Yes, it is all in my account now. No, she does not know the specifics. She thinks it is for the family." She laughed then. It was a sound I had never heard before, light, girlish, and utterly devoid of sorrow. "I know," she cooed into the receiver. "It is a fresh start, darling. It is like a rebirth. I am finally free of all that dust." Dust. That was what she called my father's life. Dust. I stood in the hallway, my hand hovering over the light switch. paralyzed by a sudden, terrifying realization. She was not grieving. She was celebrating. And she was talking to a man. The timeline in my head began to fracture. My father had been dead for 6 weeks. Who was she calling darling? At 2 a.m, I did not have to wait long to find out. Grant Holloway appeared on our doorstep a week later. Marlene introduced him as a grief counselor, recommended by a friend, but he did not look like a counselor. He looked like a shark in a polo shirt. He was big, loud, and took up too much space. He walked into our house not with the reverence of a guest entering a grieving home, but with the swagger of a buyer inspecting a property. "Nice place," he said, looking around the living room that had been stripped of my father's presence. "Good bones. Need some updating, though." "Grant is going to help us organize our finances," Marlene said, beaming at him. "He has a background in investment." I looked at Grant. He looked at me. His eyes were flat, assessing. He did not see a grieving daughter. He saw an obstacle. "Clara, right," he said, not offering his hand. "Your mom says you are still in school. What are you studying? Art, history, philosophy?" "Accounting," I said sharply. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, tighter than before. "Accounting. Good. Then you understand the value of $1. Within a month." Grant had moved in. It was not discussed. There was no family meeting. One day, his toiletries were in the bathroom. The next day, his car was in the driveway, my father's spot. The day after that, he started changing the house. He hired a contractor to tear up the carpet in the living room. He repainted the kitchen a sterile, modern white. He changed the locks on the front door and gave me a copy only after I stood outside for 20 minutes ringing the bell. "Security," he said, shrugging. "Cannot be too careful." But the real shift was in the atmosphere. The house, once a place of quiet discipline, became a regime. Grant demanded order. He did not like my books left on the coffee table. He did not like the way I folded the towels. He criticized the way I chewed my food. Marlene, who had once been indifferent to these things, suddenly became his enforcer. She echoed his complaints, amplifying them until my mere existence in the house felt like a transgression. "Grant thinks you are being lazy," she would say. "Grant says you are sleeping too late." I was waking up at 6 every morning to go to classes and then working a part-time job at the registrar's office. But in their narrative, I was a sloth. The breaking point, or what I thought was the breaking point, came when I received my acceptance letter for the master's program in forensic accounting. It was a prestigious program, expensive, but I had always assumed the insurance money was there for this exact purpose. My father had wanted me to have the education he never got. I brought the letter to dinner. Marlene and Grant were eating steaks. My place setting had a grilled cheese sandwich. "I got in," I said, placing the letter on the table. "Classes start in August. I need to send the deposit by next week." Marlene glanced at the letter and then looked at Grant. Grant did not look up from his steak. He cut a piece of meat with surgical precision, chewed it slowly, and swallowed. "That is great. Clara," Marlene said, her voice tight. "Congratulations." "So," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to write the check for the deposit, and we need to figure out the tuition schedule. It is roughly $40,000 for the first year." Silence. The only sound was the scrape of Grant's knife against the porcelain. "Marlene," Grant said, prompting her. Marlene put down her fork. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin. She looked pained. Not for me, but for the inconvenience of the conversation. "Clara, honey," she said, "we have been talking, Grant and I, about what? About your future. You are 22 years old. You are an adult. When I was your age, I was already married and working." "I am working," I said, "and I'm going to school. Dad always said the insurance money was for—" "Your father is dead," Grant said. The words were like a slap. I turned to him. He was looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Paul is gone," Grant continued, his voice calm and authoritative. "And he left a mess. You have no idea how much debt this family was in. Marlene and I have been working night and day to clean it up. There is no pot of gold. Clara, there is no tuition fund." I looked at Marlene. "That is a lie. I saw the settlement papers. I saw the insurance check. There was over $700,000. "Expenses," Marlene said quickly, her eyes darting away. "Taxes, debts you did not know about. It goes fast. Clara." "You bought a new Mercedes last week," I said, my voice rising. "Grant bought a boat." "Investments." Grant slammed his hand on the table. The plates rattled. "Do not question how I manage this household, young lady. You have had a free ride your entire life. You think the world owes you a living. You think you can just sit there and demand $40,000. "It is my father's money," I shouted. "It is my money," Marlene screamed back. "It is my compensation for my loss. I am the one who lost a husband. I am the one who has to rebuild." The mask had fallen completely. She was not the grieving widow. She was a woman who had cashed out a life policy and resented the daughter who came attached to it. I stood up, shaking. "So that is it. You are cutting me off." Grant leaned back in his chair, picking his teeth. He looked satisfied. He had been waiting for this moment. He had been waiting to assert his dominance over the one remnant of the man who came before him. "We are not cutting you off," Grant said. "We are teaching you responsibility. If you want that degree, you pay for it. If you want to live under this roof, you pay rent. $600 a month, market rate." "Rent," I whispered. "This is my home." "Not anymore," Grant said. "Not unless you pay." He stood up, walked over to the fridge, and pulled out a beer. He cracked it open, the sound sharp and final in the silent kitchen. He took a long drink, then looked at me over the can. "Let me make this crystal clear. Clara," he said, "we are starting a new life here, a disciplined life, and this house does not feed freeloaders." That was the first time I heard the word freeloader. It was not just an insult, it was a strategy. It was a way to take a victim, a daughter robbed of her inheritance, and turn her into a villain. If I was a leech, then they were justified in cutting me off. If I was lazy, then their greed was actually tough love. I looked at my mother. She was staring at her steak, refusing to meet my eyes. She had made her choice. She had chosen the man who called me a freeloader over the daughter her husband had loved. I walked out of the kitchen without another word. I went to my room, the room that would soon be taken from me, and I locked the door. I did not cry. The tears were stuck somewhere in my chest, blocked by a wall of cold, hard rage. I sat on my bed and looked at the empty space where my father's photo used to be. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "Okay." I did not know it then. But that was the moment Clara Watson, the daughter, died, and Clara Watson, the forensic accountant, was born. I did not have the power to fight them yet. I did not have the money or the proof, but I had time, and I had a memory that would hold on to that word freeloader until the day I could shove it back down their throats. But before I could fight, I had to survive, and Grant was not done with me yet. The rent demand was just the opening salvo. He did not just want my money. He wanted me gone. And he knew exactly how to make the walls close in. The transition from daughter to tenant was physical, not just administrative. 3 days after Grant declared the new rules of the house, I came home to find cardboard boxes stacked outside my bedroom door. My room, the room with the window seat where I had read every Harry Potter book, the room where my father had painted the ceiling a soft sky blue, was no longer mine. "Grant thinks the guest room downstairs is better suited for your schedule," Marlene said. She was applying lipstick in the hallway mirror, her eyes carefully avoiding my reflection. "You are coming in late from the library. You are making noise. It disrupts the household rhythm." The guest room was a euphemism. It was a glorified storage closet off the mudroom, sharing a thin wall with the industrial-sized washing machine Grant had insisted on buying. It was damp. It smelled perpetually of bleach and wet lint, and it had a single high window that looked out onto the gravel of the driveway. I moved my things in silence. I watched Grant supervise the transformation of my old room. He turned it into a home office for a consulting business that never seemed to have any clients. He painted over the sky blue ceiling with a heavy, oppressive beige. When I walked past the open door, I felt like I was looking at a grave. Life became a series of calculated movements to avoid collision. I woke up before they did. I brewed my own coffee using a cheap pot I kept in my room. I left the house by 6:30 in the morning. I spent my days in classes and my nights working shifts at a copy center near campus. The smell of toner and hot paper became my perfume. I was exhausted, my eyes perpetually gritty, but I was passing my classes. I was surviving. The friction point came 2 months later. I needed $350 to register for an advanced certification exam, a credential that would allow me to apply for higher-paying internships. I had saved $200, but I was short. My paycheck was still a week away, and the registration deadline was tomorrow. I swallowed my pride. I waited until Grant was out golfing, a hobby he had taken up with the fervor of a man trying to look wealthy. I found Marlene in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I need a favor." She stiffened. "I told you, Clara. We are not lending money. It sets a bad precedent." "It is not a loan for clothes or a movie," I said. "It is for an exam, $350. I will pay you back next Friday when my check clears. I just need to register today." Marlene sighed, snipping the stem of a hydrangea with a violent click. "We are tight right now. Clara, Grant just put a deposit down on the timeshare in Florida. We have to prioritize the family's long-term happiness." "The family," I repeated. "I am your daughter. This is for my career. It is $300. You spent more than that on this vase." She turned to me, her face flushed with a sudden, defensive anger. "Do not count my money, Clara. You have no idea what it costs to maintain a lifestyle. Grant says we are overextended. He says we need to be disciplined. If you cannot afford the exam, maybe you should not take it. Maybe you are reaching too high." Reaching too high. My father had told me I could reach the moon. My mother was telling me I could not afford a ladder. I walked out of the kitchen, but the real blow came later that night. I was scrolling through social media on my break at the copy center, eating a cold bagel. A notification popped up. Marlene had posted a photo album, anniversary weekend at the lake. I clicked on it. There were photos of Marlene and Grant on a boat, clinking glasses. Photos of them laughing with friends, and then a group photo of the whole family at a barbecue. I was there, technically. I had been in the background, bringing out a tray of burgers before Grant told me to go check the laundry. But in the photo Marlene posted, I was gone. The image had been cropped, the edge of the frame cut right through my shoulder, removing me entirely to focus on Grant's arm draped around Marlene's waist. The caption read, "My world. So blessed to have a partner who holds us all together." I stared at the screen until the backlight blurred. It was not just an edit, it was a revision of history. In Marlene's new narrative, I did not exist. I was an unsightly blemish that had been airbrushed out to make the picture perfect. I realized then that I was not just being evicted from the house, I was being evicted from her heart. The timeline for my physical eviction accelerated the following week. It was a Tuesday. I walked into the kitchen to find Grant leaning against the counter, a red marker in his hand. The wall calendar was open to next month. He had circled a date in thick, angry red ink. October 14th, my 23rd birthday. "We need to talk about your exit strategy," Grant said. He did not say hello. He did not look up from the calendar. "Exit strategy?" I asked, putting down my backpack. "You turn 23 on the 14th, he said. "That is the cutoff. In this state, you are well past the age of majority. You are not a child. You are a tenant who is not paying market rate. I am paying you $600 a month," I said. "That is 80% of my paycheck." "It is charity," Grant spat. "A room in this neighborhood goes for double that. But that is not the point. The point is, Marlene and I need our space. We are newlyweds. Essentially, we need to start our life without baggage. Baggage. So you are kicking me out? I asked. On my birthday. Think of it as a graduation, Grant said, capping the marker with a sharp click. You have until the 14th to find a place. If you are still here on the 15th, I will have your boxes on the curb. And Clara, do not try to guilt-trip your mother. She agrees with me. It is time you learn to fly. He walked past me, smelling of scotch and arrogance. I stood there, looking at the red circle. It looked like a target. That night, I did not sleep. The washing machine next door was churning through a heavy load, vibrating the wall against my back. I lay in the dark, my mind racing. If I was leaving, I needed to know what I was leaving behind. I needed to know what had really happened to the safety net my father had promised. I waited until I heard the heavy snoring rhythm of Grant's sleep from the master bedroom upstairs. I crept out of my room and went to the study, my old room. The door was unlocked. Grant was arrogant enough to believe I wouldn't dare invade his sanctuary. I did not turn on the light. I used the flashlight on my phone. Keeping the beam low, I opened the file cabinet. It was organized. I had to give him that. Files labeled house, cars, investments. I flipped through them, my fingers trembling. I found the folder for the insurance payout. It was thin, too thin. I opened it. There was the initial letter from the insurance company, confirming the amount. But where were the bank statements? Where were the transfer records? I looked for the trust documents my father had mentioned once. Years ago, a college fund he had set up when I was 10. Gone. I pulled out the house file. I saw refinancing documents dated 2 months after the funeral. Grant had taken out a second mortgage, then a home equity line of credit. He was stripping the equity out of the house as fast as he could. I found a folder labeled miscellaneous. Inside, there were receipts for jewelry, boat slip fees, and a membership to the country club. And then, at the bottom, a letter from a lawyer addressed to my father, dated 3 years prior. It referenced a safety deposit box and a contingency plan. I tried to take a picture of it, but my phone battery died. The screen went black. I stood in the dark, panic rising in my throat. They were not just spending the money, they were erasing the paper trail. They were making sure that by the time I thought to ask questions, there would be no answers left to find. The next morning, while I was shelving books at the library, my phone buzzed. It was a number I did not recognize, with a Pennsylvania area code. I almost ignored it. I was tired, hungry, and terrified of the deadline looming on the calendar. But something, maybe the desperate hope that the universe wasn't entirely empty, made me answer. Hello. Clara. The voice was raspy, smelling of cigarettes even over the phone line. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years, since Marlene had forbidden me from speaking to that side of the family. Aunt Renee, I whispered, ducking behind a stack of encyclopedias. Listen to me, kid, she said. She sounded urgent, breathless. I do not have much time. I heard through the grapevine about what is happening, about the house. Is it true? Is he kicking you out? How did you know? Your mother posted some nonsense about empty nesting on Facebook. I knew that woman would not wait long. Renee paused. Clara, you need to come see me. Now. I cannot, I said. I have work. I have classes. I have zero money. Renee, I cannot just go to Pittsburgh. You have to, Renee said. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. Paul left something with me. He made me swear not to give it to you unless things got bad. Unless she forgot who she was. What is it? Not over the phone. Can you get here? I will pay for the ticket. Just get yourself to the bus station. I looked at the clock. I had a shift at the copy center in 2 hours. I had a quiz in forensic auditing tomorrow morning. I had a life that was hanging by a thread. Okay, I said. I lied to Marlene. I told her I had picked up a double shift and would be staying at a friend's dorm to study. She did not even look up from her iPad. Fine, just do not wake us up when you come in tomorrow. I took the last $40 I had in cash. I walked to the Greyhound station on the edge of town. It was a grim place, smelling of diesel and despair. I bought a ticket for the overnight bus to Pittsburgh. The ride was a blur of neon lights and dark highways. I sat next to a woman who slept with her mouth open, clutching a plastic bag of clothes. Behind me, a man muttered to himself for 300 miles. I stared out the window, watching the reflection of my own face against the passing darkness. I looked older than 22. I looked like someone who had been running for a long time. I arrived in Pittsburgh at dawn. The city was gray and steel, waking up under a heavy blanket of fog. I took 2 city buses to get to Renee's neighborhood. It was a row of narrow brick houses that looked like they were leaning on each other for support. Renee was waiting on the porch. She looked older than I remembered. Her face was lined. Her hair dyed a fierce, unnatural red, but her eyes were the same as my father's. Soft, brown, and kind. She did not say a word. She just opened her arms, and I walked into them. I held on to her cheap polyester robe and let myself sob for the first time since the funeral. I cried for the room I lost. I cried for the mother who cropped me out. I cried for the girl who was being evicted on her birthday. Renee pulled me inside. Her house was small, cluttered, and smelled of bacon grease and stale smoke. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. She sat me down at a formica table and poured me a mug of black coffee. "Drink," she said. "You look like hell. Clara." "Thanks," I managed to say. Renee sat opposite me. She placed a heavy metal box on the table. It was an old fishing tackle box, rusted at the corners. "Your dad gave me this 4 years ago," she said. "He came to visit me. He said he was worried. He said Marlene was changing. She was spending time with people he did not trust, people who liked money more than work." "Grant," I whispered. "Maybe, or someone like him." Renee unlocked the box. Inside, amidst old fishing lures and tangles of line, was a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with heavy packing tape. On the front, in my father's blocky all-caps handwriting, it said Clara, open only in emergency. "He told me," Renee said, her voice shaking slightly, "that he did not trust Marlene to keep her promises. He said if anything happened to him, she might get scared. And when Marlene gets scared, she gets selfish." I reached for the envelope. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely grip it. "He said there might come a day when you felt like you had nothing," Renee said. "When you felt like they had taken everything. He wanted you to have this so you would know. Know what? That you are not crazy," Renee said fiercely. "That you are not a burden, and that he did not leave you defenseless." I ripped the tape. It made a loud, tearing sound in the quiet kitchen. I pulled out the contents. It wasn't cash. It wasn't a check. It was a stack of documents, copies, bank account numbers, a life insurance policy I had never seen before, a secondary policy, smaller, but beneficiary specific, and a letter. I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone, and things have gone wrong. I hope I'm just a paranoid old electrician. I hope you're reading this and laughing at your old man. But I know your mother. I love her, but she needs to be admired. She needs to shine, and sometimes people who need to shine will burn everything around them to keep the light on." I read the words, and the knot in my chest loosened. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter. I wasn't the problem. My father had seen it coming. He had seen the cracks in the foundation long before the house fell down. "He knew," I said, looking up at Renee. "He knew she would do this." "He hoped she would not," Renee said, "but he prepared for if she did." I looked at the documents again. There was an account number for a credit union in a different state, a custodial account that converted to my sole control upon turning 21. It had been sitting there for a year, untouched, because I didn't know it existed. "Is there money in this?" I asked. "Enough to get you off that bus," Renee said. "Enough to get you a roof that Grant Holloway does not own. Enough to finish that degree you talk about. It wasn't millions. It wasn't a fortune that would let me buy a yacht. But as I looked at the balance on the statement, $50,000, I realized it was something more valuable than luxury. It was freedom. I am not going back, I said. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I am not going back to that house. I am not going to wait for him to kick me out. Good, Renee said. You stay here tonight. You eat a real meal, and tomorrow, you go back and you get your things. But you do not tell them about this, not a word. Why? Because, Renee said, her eyes narrowing. If they know you have money, they will find a way to take it. They will call it back rent or family obligation. You keep this secret, Clara. This is your leverage. I nodded. I touched the letter again, tracing the ink of my father's signature. I have to go back one more time, I said. I have to get the rest of my stuff, and I have to leave them a note. What kind of note? I looked at the window, where the sun was finally breaking through the Pittsburgh fog. The kind that lets them think they won, I said. For now. The morning sun in Pittsburgh did not feel like a new beginning. It felt like an interrogation light, exposing every speck of dust in Aunt Renee's kitchen. I sat there, staring at the rusted tackle box, my hands still resting on the documents that changed everything in the previous hours. I had felt a rush of adrenaline, a desperate desire to run, but now, gravity was setting in. I needed to understand the weight of what my father had left me. Renee lit another cigarette, the smoke curling around her fingers like a protective spell. She pointed a manicured nail at the bottom of the box. You stopped looking too soon, she said, her voice rough with years of hard living and hard truths. Dig deeper, Clara. Paul was a man who believed in backups. I reached back into the metal container. My fingers brushed against the cold steel of the bottom tray, and then I felt it. It was small, taped to the underside of the hinge with black electrical tape. A USB drive. It was an old model, bulky and gray, the kind that held maybe 2 gigabytes of data. But to me, it looked like a black box recovered from a plane crash. He recorded things, Renee said, exhaling a long plume of smoke. Towards the end, when he started noticing that mail was going missing, when he started noticing that Marlene was taking calls in the driveway, I peeled the tape back and held the drive in my palm. It felt heavy. And read the letter again, Renee instructed. Read the postscript. That is the part that kept him up at night. I unfolded the letter my father had handwritten. I had skimmed it in my initial panic, desperate only to know if he loved me, if he had seen me. Now, I read it with the eyes of the forensic accountant I was training to be. Clara, he wrote, his handwriting jagged, likely written in his truck on a lunch break. I love your mother. You know I do. But Marlene has a hole inside her that love cannot fill. She grew up with nothing, and she is terrified of going back to nothing. Fear makes people do terrible things. It makes them justify the unjustifiable. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to read the next paragraph. If you are reading this, I am gone, and if I am gone, there is no one to stand between her fear and your future. I have put $50,000 in this account for you. It is not a fortune. It is not enough to retire on. It is a shield. Use it to finish school. Use it to get a roof over your head that no one can kick you out of. $50,000. In the grand scheme of the world, it was a modest sum. But to a 22-year-old girl facing homelessness, it was the difference between drowning and treading water. It was not a lottery win. It was a lifeline. Then came the postscript, the part Renee had pointed out. P.S. Watch your credit, baby girl. I found an application for a credit card in the trash last week. It was filled out in your name, but the handwriting was not yours. I stopped it this time, but I cannot stop them all from the grave. Do not let them turn you into their asset. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty kitchen. My father had not just left me money. He had left me a warning. He had predicted the freeloader narrative before it even began. He knew that Grant and Marlene viewed me not as a daughter, but as a resource to be harvested. A debt, I whispered, looking up at Renee. He thought they would try to pin a debt on me. He thought they would use your clean slate to wipe up their messes, Renee corrected. She crushed her cigarette into the overflowing ashtray. Listen to me. Clara, you take this box. You take the money, but you do not go back there and scream. You do not wave this in their faces. Why not? I asked, feeling a surge of righteous anger. They lied. They stole my tuition. They are kicking me out. Because right now, you are just a girl with a grievance, Renee said sharply. Grant is a man with a reputation. If you fight him now, he will crush you. He will say you stole the money. He will say you forged the letter. He has the house, the lawyers, and the community. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was rough, calloused. You win by surviving, she said. You win by becoming something they cannot touch. You go back. You pack your bags, and you disappear. You let them think they broke you, and while they are busy patting themselves on the back, you build a life so solid that when you finally come back for them, you come as a tank, not a target. I nodded slowly. It was the hardest advice I had ever had to swallow. Every instinct in me wanted to run home and scream the truth until the windows shattered, but I knew she was right. I had to play the long game. I took the bus back to North Carolina that afternoon. I hid the USB drive inside the lining of my winter coat. I tucked the documents into the deepest pocket of my backpack. Wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, I felt like a smuggler crossing a border, carrying contraband that could either save me or get me killed. When I walked through the front door of the house in Lakeview Hills, it was nearly 8 o'clock at night. The house was quiet, but the lights in the kitchen were blazing. I had hoped to slip in unnoticed, pack the rest of my things, and vanish before they returned from whatever dinner club they were attending. But as I stepped into the foyer, I saw them. Marlene was at the island, chopping lemons with aggressive precision. Grant was leaning against the refrigerator, a glass of scotch in his hand. They stopped moving when I entered. The silence was instant and suffocating. "Well," Grant said, his voice dripping with false joviality. "The prodigal tenant returns. We were starting to wonder if you had self-evicted early." Marlene looked up, her eyes scanning my disheveled appearance. I had been on a bus for 10 hours. My clothes were wrinkled. I smelled of stale tobacco smoke from Renee's kitchen. "Where have you been, Clara?" she asked. Her tone was not worried. It was accusatory. "You missed your shift at the copy center. They called the house looking for you. Do you know how embarrassing that is? To have your employer calling my home asking why my daughter is irresponsible." "I had to take care of something," I said. Keeping my voice steady, I gripped the strap of my backpack tighter, feeling the reassuring crinkle of the plastic bag inside. Grant pushed himself off the refrigerator. He walked toward me, sniffing the air theatrically. "You smell like a bar. Or a pool hall. Is that what you're doing now? Drinking away your tuition money?" "I visited family," I said. It was a mistake. I saw Marlene's face harden instantly. "Family," she repeated. "We are your family, Clara. Everyone else is just distraction." "I went to see Aunt Renee," I said. I didn't want to say it, but I was too tired to lie. The reaction was visceral. Marlene dropped the knife. It clattered loudly against the granite countertop. Grant's face went a shade of red that matched the expensive wine sitting on the counter. "You went to see that woman," Marlene hissed. "After I explicitly told you she was toxic, she hated your father. Clara, she hates us." "She seemed to care a lot more about me than you do right now," I said quietly. "Do not speak to your mother like that," Grant snapped. He stepped into my personal space, using his height to intimidate me. "You went running to the trash to complain about the castle. Did you beg her for money? Did you tell her a sob story about how cruel we are for expecting you to act like an adult?" "I did not ask her for a dime," I said. It was technically the truth. I hadn't asked. It had been given. "Good," Grant said. "Because she has nothing. Just like you." He turned back to Marlene, shaking his head. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Marlene. She is unstable. She is ungrateful. We give her a home, And she runs off to gossip with the enemy. Marlene looked at me, her eyes wet with tears that I now recognized as a weapon. I am so disappointed, Clara. We have done everything for you. Everything, I repeated. Except be honest. What is that supposed to mean? Grant demanded. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had erased my father's existence from this house. I thought about the USB drive in my coat. I thought about the debt warning. I wanted to destroy him. But Renee's voice echoed in my head. You come back as a tank, not a target. It means, I said, exhaling slowly, that you do not have to worry about the 14th. You do not have to worry about me being a burden anymore. Oh, Grant raised an eyebrow. You found a place with what money? I am handling it, I said. I am moving out tonight, Marlene blinked. Tonight do not be dramatic. Clara, it is late. It is time, I said. Grant said the house does not feed freeloaders. I am just following the rules. I walked past them. I did not run. I walked with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. I went to the small room off the laundry area. I pulled my 2 suitcases out from under the bed. I packed with efficiency. I took the clothes I actually wore. I took my textbooks. I took the framed photo of my father that I had hidden in my sock drawer so Grant wouldn't see it. I left the rest. The old toys. The dresses Marlene had bought me for events I hated. The bedding, I left it all. I was shedding my skin. It took me 20 minutes. When I zipped the last bag, the sound was final. I carried my bags to the front door. Grant and Marlene were still in the kitchen. I could hear them whispering. Grant was angry. Marlene sounded frantic, probably worrying about what the neighbors would say if they saw me leaving with suitcases at night. I did not go in to say goodbye. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't be a declaration of war, and I wasn't ready to declare war yet. Instead, I took a notepad from the side table in the foyer. I unclipped a pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I thought about writing a furious manifesto. I thought about writing, I know about the insurance money, but I wrote 3 sentences instead. I am leaving the key on the table. You will not have to support me ever again. Thank you for teaching me who family is. I tore the page off and placed it next to the brass house key, the key that Grant had made me beg for. I opened the front door. The night air was cool and smelled of rain. I stepped out onto the porch, dragging my suitcases behind me. The wheels rumbled on the brick, a low growl of departure. I walked down the long driveway. I did not look back at the house. I knew that if I looked back, I might see my father's ghost standing in the window, or I might see Marlene watching me with that look of relief she couldn't quite hide. I reached the curb and called a cab. While I waited, I looked up at the sky. It was pitch black, no stars visible through the cloud cover. It was terrifying. I had no job, no apartment lined up, and a family that had just amputated me. But I touched the pocket where the USB drive sat. I touched the backpack where the bank account number was hidden. I was not a freeloader. I was a vault, and I was taking the most valuable things with me. The cab arrived, its headlights cutting through the dark. The driver popped the trunk. "Where to?" he asked, as I heaved my bags inside. "The Motel 6 on the highway," I said, "and then, tomorrow somewhere far away from here." As the car pulled away, leaving the manicured lawns of Lakeview Hills behind, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was lighter than that. It was the absence of weight. The house was gone. The lies were gone. I was alone, and for the first time in my life, I was dangerous. Philadelphia was the perfect place to disappear. It was a city of brick and bone, heavy with history and indifferent to tears. I arrived with 2 suitcases and a bank account that I treated like a loaded gun, dangerous, necessary, and to be used only in the direst of emergencies. I did not move into a dorm. I found a studio apartment in a walk-up building in West Philly that smelled of curry and old radiator steam. The rent was $650 a month. I paid it on the first, every single time. I bought a mattress from a discount store and put it on the floor. I bought a desk from a thrift shop, and then I went to work. For the next 4 years, I did not have a social life. I did not have hobbies. I had a mission. I enrolled in a forensic accounting program at a university that valued technical skill over pedigree. I chose forensic accounting not because I loved math, but because I wanted to understand the anatomy of a lie. I wanted to know how a man like Grant could take a pile of money, make it vanish, and convince the world it was never there. I wanted to learn how to read a ledger like a crime scene. I treated the $50,000 my father left me as a sacred trust. I did not buy new clothes. I ate peanut butter sandwiches. I walked instead of taking the subway if the distance was less than 2 miles. Every dollar I spent was an investment in my own weaponization. My professors noticed me. I was the student in the front row who asked questions about shell companies and offshore tax havens with a focus that bordered on obsession. By my junior year, I landed an internship at Northbridge Integrity Solutions, a boutique firm in Center City that specialized in corporate fraud investigations. Northbridge was not a place for the soft-hearted. It was a place where former FBI agents and IRS auditors drank black coffee and hunted embezzlers. My supervisor was a woman named Sarah, who wore tailored suits and could spot a falsified expense report from across the room. "You look hungry, Watson," she told me on my first day. "Not for lunch, for blood." "I just like accuracy," I replied. "Good," she said, "because in this town, accuracy is the only thing that separates the solvent from the indicted." I worked 60 hours a week while taking a full course load. There were nights I slept under my desk at Northbridge, using my coat as a blanket, waking up at 5 in the morning to wash my face in the break room sink before my first class. I ate instant noodles until the smell of sodium made me nauseous. My peers were going to frat parties and posting photos of their spring break trips to Cancun. I was analyzing the cash flow statements of failing construction companies. I was lonely, but I was not weak. Every time I felt the exhaustion drag me down, I thought of the word freeloader. I used it as fuel. I was building a muscle of independence so strong that no one would ever be able to call me a parasite again. It was during this time, amid the grind of my final year, that I met Ruben Ruiz. It was not a cinematic meeting. There were no fireworks. We were both volunteering at a community tax clinic on a Saturday morning in February. It was sleeting outside, and the waiting room was packed with people who could not afford HR block. I was trying to explain the earned income tax credit to a tired mother of 3 when the printer jammed. "Paper feed roller is dusty," a voice said behind me. I turned around. Ruben was standing there. He was wearing a gray sweater and jeans. He had dark, calm eyes and hands that looked capable of fixing things. He didn't push me aside to fix the printer. He just handed me a cloth and pointed to the latch. "Wipe that sensor," he said. "It gets finicky when the humidity drops." I wiped it. The printer hummed back to life. "Thanks," I said. "I am Ruben," he said. "I am managing the intake desk. Clara, I am doing returns." "I know," he said. "You are the one who found the error in the Johnson return last week. You saved them $2,000. He did not look at me with pity. He did not look at me with the predatory assessment I had grown used to from men in bars or professors who thought I was too intense. He looked at me like I was a colleague, an equal. We went for coffee after the shift. I found out he was in operations management. He liked systems. He liked making things run efficiently. He listened when I talked about my work at Northbridge, when I told him, vaguely, that I was estranged from my family. He did not press for the sob story. "Some bridges are worth burning," he said simply. "It saves you the trouble of crossing back over." Ruben became my anchor. He was the silence in the noise of my life. He did not try to save me. He knew I was saving myself. When we moved in together 2 years later, we split the rent down the middle, to the penny. He understood that for me, financial dependence was a form of trauma. He never offered to pay my share. He respected me enough to let me struggle when I had to, and he was there to high-five me when I succeeded. My career accelerated. Northbridge hired me full-time upon graduation. I spent 5 years there. rising from junior analyst to lead investigator. I exposed a charity CEO who was using donations to fund his gambling addiction. I helped the district attorney build a case against a real estate developer who was Ponzi scheming his investors. But working for someone else was not enough. I needed total control. 7 years after leaving Northbridge, I opened my own firm, Watson Ruiz Advisory. Ruben left his corporate job to handle the operations and client relations. While I handled the investigations, we were a formidable team. He was the charm and the shield. I was the sword. We bought a townhouse in a quiet, historic neighborhood. We paid 20% down. The mortgage was in both our names. Every time I signed a check, every time I looked at our healthy savings account, I felt another layer of the old Clara shed away. Throughout this entire decade, I maintained a strict policy of digital silence. I did not have an Instagram account. My Facebook was a ghost town, locked down and inactive. I did not appear in social columns. If you Googled Clara Watson, you found my professional LinkedIn profile, which listed my credentials and my firm's address, but nothing personal. No photos of vacations, no updates on my marriage. This was strategic. I knew Marlene. I knew that she thrived on comparison. If she could see my life, she could twist it. If I looked successful, she would say I was arrogant. If I looked struggling, she would say I was failing by giving her nothing. I forced her to invent a narrative in a vacuum. I let her continue telling her friends that I was a mess, a dropout, a freeloader. I let her build a castle of lies on a foundation of sand, knowing that one day I would kick it over. But the past has a way of knocking on the door. Even when you have double-bolted it. It happened on a Tuesday night in November. Almost exactly 10 years after I had left Lakeview Hills, I was in my home office, reviewing a credit report for a client. It was routine work, dull and rhythmic. Ruben was downstairs making tea. I decided, on a whim, to pull my own credit report. It is a habit for people in my industry. We check our financial vitals the way doctors check their own blood pressure. I logged into the secure server. The report generated in seconds. I scrolled through the green checks: mortgage paid on time, credit cards paid in full, 0 derogatory marks, and then I saw it. In the section for hard inquiries, the record of who has tried to access your credit history for the purpose of opening a new account, there was a flag. It was dated 3 weeks ago. Applicant Clara J. Watson, address listed on application 4402 Pinecrest Lane, Lakeview Hills, NC, lender Southern States, Auto Finance. I froze. 4402, Pinecrest Lane. That was the house. That was the house I had walked out of with 2 suitcases. Someone had tried to buy a car in my name. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with fear, but with a cold, sharp recognition. The application had been rejected because the address did not match my current residence, and because I had placed a freeze on my credit years ago, a lesson from my father's letter. But they had tried. "Ruben," I called out. My voice was calm, but it had an edge that made him appear in the doorway instantly. "What is it?" he asked, setting 2 mugs of tea on the desk. "Look at this." He leaned over my shoulder. He read the line on the screen. He knew the address. He knew the history. "Southern States Auto Finance," he murmured. "That is a subprime lender, high interest, the kind of place you go when you cannot get a loan from a real bank." "They are trying to use my credit," I said. 10 years later, and they are still trying to harvest me. "Or," Ruben said, his mind working through the operational logic, "they are desperate. People with good credit do not try to commit identity theft against their estranged children. Clara, this smells like panic." I sat back in my chair. The anger that had been simmering for a decade began to boil, but it was a controlled boil. It was steam turning a turbine. "Renee told me Grant was in trouble," I said. "She said the business was failing. This proves it. He has tapped out his own credit. He has tapped out Marlene's. Now he is reaching for the ghost." Ruben put a hand on my shoulder. "What do you want to do? We can file a police report. We can send a cease and desist. I can have our lawyer call them tomorrow and scare them straight." I looked at the screen. I looked at the name, Lakeview Hills. I thought about the invite I knew would come eventually, the anniversary, the stage they would set. If I sued them now, it would be a messy legal battle. They would deny it. They would say it was a mistake. They would play the victim. No, I said. No lawyers. Not yet. Clara, Reuben warned gently, do not play with fire. I am not playing with fire, I said, turning to look at my husband. I am the fire inspector. And I just found a code violation. I picked up my tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and grounding. We are going to let it slide, I said. For now, we are going to save this little piece of paper, and we are going to wait. Wait for what? For the invitation, I said. If they are this desperate for money, they will need to keep up appearances. They will throw a party. They will try to re-cement their social standing, and they will invite me, because a reunited family is a great prop for a loan application. Reuben looked at me for a long moment. He saw the calculation in my eyes. He saw the 10 years of ramen noodles and late nights and discipline coalescing into a single point of impact. Okay, he said. We wait. But when we go prepared. Oh, we will be prepared, I promised. I am going to bring them a gift. The inquiry on the screen seemed to pulse. It was not just a crime. It was an invitation. They had reached out to touch the freeloader, thinking she was still helpless. They had no idea that the hand they were trying to bite was now wearing a gauntlet of iron. I saved the report as a PDF. I named the file evidence_01. It was the first brick in the wall I was about to drop on them. I took a sip of tea, and for the first time in 10 years, I looked forward to seeing my mother. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, sandwiched between a utility bill and a subscription renewal for a forensic accounting journal. It was heavy. The envelope was made of cream-colored cardstock, thick enough to require extra postage, with the return address embossed in gold foil. The Halloways. I held it in my hand, feeling the texture of the paper, in my line of work. High-quality paper often serves as a distraction from low-quality assets. Fraudsters love linen finishes and foil stamping. It buys them credibility they cannot afford. I slid a letter opener under the flap. Inside was a card that smelled faintly of lavender and desperation. Marlene and Grant Halloway request the honor of your presence at their 20th wedding anniversary celebration. Lakeview Hills Country Club. Saturday, January 24th, 7 o'clock in the evening. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Reuben Ruiz. I stared at the name. For 10 years, my mother had refused to acknowledge my marriage. She had referred to Reuben as that friend of yours, or the roommate. Now, suddenly, he was on the invitation. His name scripted in elegant calligraphy right next to mine. This was not a gesture of acceptance. It was a tactical maneuver. You do not insult the husband when you need the wife's money. I placed the invitation on my desk, right next to the printout of the credit inquiry I had discovered weeks earlier. The timeline was impeccable. First, they try to secretly tap into my credit. When that fails, they send a gilded invitation. They were fishing, casting lines into the dark, hoping anything would bite. My phone rang 2 hours later. It was Renee. You got it, didn't you? She asked without preamble. Cream envelope, gold foil, I asked, putting my phone on speaker as I organized a client file. That is the one, Renee said. Her voice sounded tinny, accompanied by the background noise of a busy diner. The whole town is talking about it. A black tie affair at the country club. People are saying Grant is pulling out all the stops. People say a lot of things, I said. What are the numbers saying? Renee lowered her voice. The numbers are bleeding. Clara, my friend works in the clerk's office at the county courthouse. Grant has 3 liens against his contracting business. 3, suppliers are suing him for unpaid materials, and there is a rumor that the IRS is auditing his returns from 3 years ago. Civil investigation, I murmured. That explains the desperation. He is drowning, Renee confirmed. And he thinks a big, flashy party will convince his creditors that he is still liquid. It is a show. Clara, a song and dance to buy time, and he needs you there. Why me? Because a happy reunited family looks stable, Renee said. And because if the rumors about your success have reached Lakeview Hills, he probably thinks you are a walking ATM. He is going to try to corner you. Kid, he is going to make a scene about family unity and then ask for a temporary bridge loan while the guests are watching. Let him try, I said. Are you going? I have to, I said. If I don't go, they control the narrative. They will say I abandoned them again. They will say I am the reason they are struggling. I need to go and close the book. Renee, I am tired of reading the same chapter. That evening, I showed the invitation to Reuben. He was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He wiped his hands on a towel and picked up the card. He read it once, his face impassive, then flipped it over to check the RSVP date. Black tie, he noted. Expensive. Calculated, I corrected. Do you want to go? He asked, looking me in the eye. I want to finish it. I said, I have the credit report. I have the evidence of the identity theft attempt. But I need to see them. I need to see if there is any part of my mother left, or if she has been completely consumed by the character she plays. Reuben nodded. Then we go. But we have ground rules. I am not there to make small talk with people who watched you get kicked out and did nothing. I am there as your security detail. If you give me the signal, we leave. If you want to burn the place down, I will hand you the matches. But I will not let them corner you. We go to close the chapter, I said. Not to start a war, unless they start one first. We sent the RSVP the next morning, 3 days before the event. The twist I had been subconsciously waiting for arrived. It came in the form of an email to my work address. The subject line read, Urgent payment confirmation for Halloway anniversary, Lakeview Hills, CC. I frowned. My work email was public, listed on my firm's website, but I had certainly not given it to the country club. I clicked it open. Dear Ms. Watson, we are writing to urgently verify the billing details for the event on Saturday. Mr. Halloway provided your name and this email address as the secondary contact for the final deposit. We have attempted to run the primary card on file a Visa ending in 4429, but it has been declined 3 times. Mr. Halloway mentioned that you would be handling the catering balance. Please find the attached invoice for $8,400. We need settlement by 5 o'clock today, or we will be forced to cancel the vendor contracts. I sat back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp hiss. It was breathtaking audacity. Grant had not just invited me. He had listed me as the financial guarantor for his own party without asking me. He had likely told the event coordinator, Oh, my daughter is a successful accountant. Send the bill to her if there is a glitch. He was banking on the fact that I would be too embarrassed to let the party be canceled, or that I would pay it just to avoid the awkwardness of a bounced check in my hometown. He was using my name to float his lifestyle. Again, I looked at the invoice, $8,000. It was a significant amount of money, but for Watson Ruiz Advisory, it was a manageable expense. I had a choice. I could reply to the email, tell them I had no knowledge of this, and watch the party collapse. Grant would be humiliated. The guests would arrive to locked doors. It would be a chaotic, messy revenge, but it would also paint me as the villain in their story. Grant would spin it. She promised to pay. She backed out at the last minute to hurt us. No. That was messy. I liked clean. I wanted total control. If I paid the bill, I wasn't the daughter being leeched off of. I was the owner. If I paid the bill, the event did not belong to Marlene and Grant anymore. It belonged to me. They were just guests at my table, eating my food, drinking my wine, living on my dime, and the receipt. The receipt would be the ultimate weapon. I pulled out my corporate American Express card. I typed in the numbers. I hit send. A moment later, a confirmation email pinged back. Payment successful. I forwarded the receipt to my personal secure folder. adding it to the file labeled Halloway_case. Then I replied to the event coordinator, "The balance is paid. Do not inform Mr. or Mrs. Halloway. I want to surprise them." It was the truth. It was going to be a very big surprise. The night before the party, I prepared the gift. I did not go to a department store. I went to the safe in my office. I took out a black box I had purchased specifically for this purpose. It was leather-bound, sleek, and heavy. Inside, I placed a velvet folder containing a single, notarized document. Over the past week, after receiving the credit inquiry, I had done some digging. I had contacted the bank that held the mortgage on the Lakeview Hills house. It turned out that Grant's refinancing had been sold to a secondary distressed debt buyer, a portfolio of high-risk loans that were nearing foreclosure. Through my firm, I had approached that buyer. Distressed debt is a commodity. If you offer cash, you can buy a mortgage note just like you can buy a used car. I had bought the note on 4402 Pinecrest Lane. Technically, I was now their bank. The document in the velvet folder was a deed of release. It was a forgiveness of the debt. It was a document that would wipe the slate clean, giving them the house free and clear. It was a gift worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was the ultimate freeloader refutation. If they treated me with kindness, if they showed even a flicker of genuine remorse or love, I would give them the house. I would hand them their freedom and walk away, leaving them to their small, sad lives. But I was not naive. I knew who I was dealing with. So, I reached into the safe again and pulled out a second folder. I labeled this one Exhibit B. Inside this folder, I placed the copy of my father's letter from the tackle box. I placed the credit report showing the identity theft attempt. I placed the email from the country club showing they had tried to stick me with the bill. And I placed a forensic cash flow analysis I had compiled using public records, showing exactly how Grant had drained my father's life insurance money into shell companies and bad investments. I placed Exhibit B in a false bottom of the box, hidden underneath the velvet lining that held the mortgage forgiveness papers. It was a Schrodinger's gift. Until the box was opened, until they spoke, the contents were both a blessing and a curse. Their behavior would determine which layer was revealed. "Are you ready?" Reuben asked. Standing in the doorway of my office, I ran my hand over the leather lid of the box. It felt cool to the touch. "I am," I said. "If they want a daughter, they get the house. If they want a mark, they get the truth." We drove down to North Carolina the next day. The drive took 6 hours. We listened to podcasts about white-collar crime, the irony not lost on either of us. When we pulled up to the gate of Lakeview Hills, the guard checked our names on the list. "Ruiz," he said, scanning the clipboard. "Ah, yes. VIP, parking. Go straight to the front. VIP, parking." Grant really was pulling out all the stops to butter me up. The clubhouse was lit up like a palace. Valets were running back and forth. Women in gowns that cost more than my first car were gliding up the stairs. I adjusted the rear-view mirror and looked at myself. I was 32 years old. I was wearing a black dress that fit like armor. My hair was sharp, precise. I checked my lipstick. It was a deep, blood red. Reuben reached over and took my hand. His palm was warm. "Remember," he said, "you do not owe them anything. Not a smile, not a tear, not a dollar." "I know," I said. "I paid the bill. Reuben, I own the room." "Then let us go inspect your property." We stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and expensive perfume. I carried the black box in my left hand. It swung slightly with my stride, a pendulum counting down the minutes. As we walked up the grand staircase, I saw a familiar face near the entrance. It was a woman I had gone to high school with, someone who used to make fun of my thrift store clothes. She looked at me, then looked at Reuben, then looked at the way we carried ourselves. Her jaw dropped slightly. I didn't stop. I walked right past her, through the double doors, and into the lion's den. The ballroom was exactly as I remembered it from the photos Marlene used to post of other people's parties. Gold chandeliers, round tables with white linens, a jazz band playing soft, inoffensive music, but this time, there was a banner hanging over the stage, Marlene Grant. 20 years of love. Love, I whispered to myself. That is an expensive word. I scanned the room. I saw them. Marlene was standing by the bar, holding a glass of champagne, her head thrown back in laughter. Grant was next to her, shaking hands with the fervor of a politician running for re-election. They looked happy. They looked successful. They looked like people who had gotten away with it. I tightened my grip on the box. "Showtime," I said to Ruben. We began to move through the crowd. I could feel the ripple effect as people noticed us. The whispers started. The heads turned. The prodigal daughter had returned, not in rags, but in silk. I saw Marlene's eyes catch mine across the room. For a second, just a split second, I saw fear. It was the look of a woman who realizes the prop she ordered has arrived, and it is much heavier than she expected. But then the mask slammed down. The smile appeared. She waved, a frantic, stiff-fingered summons. "Clara," she called out, her voice pitching high enough to cut through the jazz. "Clara, you made it." I walked toward her, the black box heavy in my hand. I was not there to ruin her party. I was there to pay for it. And tonight, everyone was going to get exactly what they paid for. The ballroom of the Lakeview Hills Country Club was a masterclass in American theater. To the untrained eye, it was a tableau of success, crystal flutes catching the light, heavy velvet drapes muffling the outside world, and the low, confident hum of people who believe they own the ground they walk on. But I was not an untrained eye. I was a forensic accountant. I looked at the room and I did not see wealth. I saw leverage. I saw debt disguised as diamonds. I saw panic wrapped in silk. Ruben and I moved through the crowd with the fluidity of predators entering a new territory. The guests were a mix of familiar faces from my childhood aging socialites, local business owners, members of the charity board my mother chaired with iron-fisted benevolence, and newer younger couples who looked eager to climb the ladder that Grant and Marlene were pretending to hold steady. We had barely made it past the ice sculpture of a swan when the first probe was launched. "Clara, is that little Clara Watson?" I turned to face a woman in a powder blue gown that was slightly too tight across the bust. It was Mrs. Higgins, the mother of a girl I had gone to elementary school with. She held a glass of white wine with a grip that suggested it was not her first. "Mrs. Higgins," I said, offering a polite, practiced smile. "It has been a long time." She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my dress, then my shoes, then the simple but clearly expensive clutch I held. Confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by a pitying sweetness. "My goodness," she cooed. "We were just so surprised to hear you were coming. Marlene told us how difficult things have been for you. You know, with the job hopping and the instability." She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is so brave of you to show your face. Most people would be too ashamed to come back after causing their parents so much grief." I felt Ruben stiffen beside me, but I squeezed his hand. This was part of the data collection. "Marlene worries too much," I said smoothly. "I have been managing." "Oh, I am sure," Mrs. Higgins said, glancing at Ruben. "And it helps to have a strong man to lean on. Does it not? Marlene said your husband has been an absolute saint for taking you on." There it was. The narrative was not just that I was poor, it was that I was incompetent. I was a charity case that Ruben had adopted, in their version of the story. I wasn't a partner in a successful firm. I was a rescue dog. "He is very patient," I agreed, my voice dry. "Excuse us, Mrs. Higgins, we need to find the hosts." We walked away, leaving her frowning into her wine. "St. Reuben," my husband murmured, keeping his eyes forward. "I should get a halo." "Hold out for the canonization," I said. "It pays better." We found Grant holding court near the open bar. He was laughing at a joke told by the president of the local bank, but the laugh did not reach his eyes. Up close, the cracks in the facade were visible. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that the air conditioning could not explain. His tuxedo was impeccable, but his hands were restless. Every 30 seconds, his eyes darted to the entrance of the ballroom and then to the pocket of his jacket where his phone was vibrating. He looked like a man who was waiting for a check to clear or a bomb to go off. When he saw us, his expression shifted through a complex series of adjustments: shock, calculation, and finally, a broad, salesman-like welcome. "Clara," he boomed, stepping away from the banker to intercept us. He did not hug me. He clapped a hand on Reuben's shoulder, shaking him with aggressive familiarity. "And Reuben, you made it. I was telling Marlene. I said, if anyone can get her here, it is Reuben." "Happy anniversary, Grant," Reuben said. He did not smile. He stood with his feet planted shoulder-width apart, a subtle stance of dominance that made Grant take half a step back. "Great turnout, right?" Grant gestured grandly at the room. "Everyone who is anyone. You know how it is. In business, perception is reality." "Is it?" I asked. "I find that the balance sheet usually has the final say." Grant's smile faltered. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He was looking for the scared girl who used to beg for tuition money. He didn't find her. "Always the bean counter," he joked weakly. Then he leaned in, his breath smelling of scotch and mints. "Look, Clara, let us keep it light tonight. Okay, your mother is fragile. She has been under a lot of stress. Do not start asking about old history. I am just here to celebrate," I said, "and to give you your gift." I lifted the black box slightly. Grant's eyes fixated on it. I saw greed flare in his pupils. He thought it was money. He thought I had finally capitulated and brought a check to buy back their affection. "That is very thoughtful," he said, licking his lips. "We can open it later, in private. We have a meeting, a toast scheduled soon." Before he could say more, a force of nature in silver sequins descended upon us. Marlene Watson Halloway hooked her arm through Reuben's, effectively cutting me out of the circle. She beamed up at my husband, ignoring the fact that his arm remained rigid against her side. "Reuben," she exclaimed. "Oh, thank you. Thank you for bringing her." She turned her head slightly to acknowledge me with a nod that was more dismissal than greeting. "Hello, Clara. You look well. Surprisingly well." "Hello, Mother," I said. She turned back to Reuben immediately. "I know it must have been a drag to drive all this way. Clara hates driving. She always had such anxiety about simple things. I hope she didn't make you stop every hour." "Clara drove," Reuben said quietly. Marlene laughed, a tinkling, artificial sound. "Oh, stop it. You are always covering for her. It is so sweet. Grant and I were just saying, it takes a special kind of man to deal with a woman who needs so much maintenance." I watched her face. It was a mask of heavy makeup and filler, designed to hide the passage of time, but it couldn't hide the malice. She wasn't just lying to protect herself. She was lying to diminish me. She needed me to be small so she could feel big. "She is low maintenance," Reuben said, his voice dropping to a register that cut through the ambient noise. "And she is the most capable person in this room." Marlene's smile froze. She patted his arm condescendingly. "Of course, dear. We all love her. We just know her limitations." She pulled Grant away then. Claiming they had to greet the mayor, as they walked off, I saw Grant check his phone again. He typed a furious text message, his shoulders hunched. "They are terrified," I whispered to Reuben. "They should be," he replied. I needed a moment to recalibrate. The air in the room felt thick with lies. I walked toward the edge of the ballroom, seeking a quiet corner near the buffet. I was pretending to inspect a tray of crab cakes when a soft voice spoke from my left. "You look like Paul." I froze. I turned slowly. Standing there was a woman in a modest navy suit. She had gray hair cut in a sensible bob, and eyes that held a depth of kindness I hadn't seen in this zip code for a decade. "Mrs. Carter?" I asked. Evelyn Carter smiled. She had been my father's friend. They had volunteered together at the Electrical Union's scholarship fund. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. "I go by Evelyn now. Honey," she said. She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was warm and real. "I almost didn't come. I don't usually run in these circles anymore. Marlene and I drifted apart after your dad passed." "Drifted apart?" I asked. "Or were pushed?" Evelyn sighed. Marlene didn't like having people around who remembered the way things were. She wanted to rewrite the script. I didn't fit the new casting call. She looked at Grant across the room. He was now frantically whispering to a waiter. "I heard stories," Evelyn said softly. "About you. About how you were struggling. How Paul left you nothing and you couldn't cope." "Is that what she told you?" "She told everyone," Evelyn said. "She said Paul was reckless with money, that he gambled it away before he died, that he left them with nothing but debt and a spoiled daughter." I felt a surge of cold fury. Insulting me was one thing. Slandering the dead man who had worked himself into the ground for them was another. "He didn't gamble," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "He was the most disciplined man I ever knew." "I know," Evelyn said firmly. "I was the treasurer of the Union Fund. Clara, Paul was meticulous. He planned for everything. When Marlene started telling people he left them destitute, it never sat right with me. Paul wouldn't leave his girl without a safety net." I looked at the black box in my hand. "He didn't." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. She looked at the box, then back at me. She understood. "Good," she whispered. "Give them hell, honey. For Paul." She squeezed my arm and drifted back into the crowd. A silent ally in a room of enemies. I rejoined Reuben near a high-top table. He was sipping club soda and watching a group of men near the bar. "Intel?" I asked. "The guy in the gray suit," Reuben said, nodding discreetly toward a man who was swaying slightly, clearly 3 scotches deep. "That is Bob Miller, real estate developer. He is talking loud." I tuned in, my hearing, sharpened by years of listening to whispered confessions in conference rooms, picked up the conversation. "Grant is sweating bullets," Bob Miller was saying to his companion. "He hit me up last week, said he has a guaranteed project, needs a bridge loan of $200,000, but here's the kicker, he can't sign for it." "Why not?" the other man asked. "Credit is shot," Bob laughed. "Toxic. He said he has a silent partner coming in, someone with pristine credit who is going to co-sign the new notes. Said it is a family member who wants to get into the business." My blood ran cold. The identity theft wasn't just for a car. The car was a test run. Grant was planning to use my name, my credit score, my reputation, which he assumed was good enough to leverage. Despite telling everyone I was a failure to secure a massive business loan, he was going to forge my signature on a partnership agreement. He wasn't just a freeloader, he was a predator. The realization clicked into place with the precision of a tumbler's in a lock. The invitation, the reunion, the public display of forgiveness. It was all a setup to legitimize me as his partner so he could defraud a bank in my name. Reuben saw the look on my face. He set his glass down. "What is it?" "He is selling me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He is selling my credit score to Bob Miller. He thinks he can bully me into signing. Or he is just going to forge it and claim I agreed to it tonight in front of witnesses." Reuben's jaw tightened. "That is a felony." "It is only a felony if you catch them," I said. "If I leave tonight without exposing this, he will do it. He will ruin me. Reuben. He will drag Watson Ruiz into bankruptcy court to save his own skin." Reuben turned to me. He placed both hands on my shoulders, creating a physical barrier between me and the room. "Okay," he said. "We have a choice. We can walk out right now. We call the police from the car. We file the report. It is messy, but you are safe. Or, Reuben said, looking at the black box. We finish it, right here. You have the deed. You have the evidence. You have the floor." He paused, searching my eyes. "Do you want to end this cleanly, or do you want to end it thoroughly?" I looked at Marlene, who was now holding court in the center of the room, laughing at something the mayor said. I looked at Grant, who was shaking hands with Bob Miller, looking like he had just closed the deal of a lifetime. They had taken my home. They had taken my father's memory. They had taken 10 years of my life, and now they wanted to take my name. "Thoroughly," I said. Reuben nodded. He stepped back. "Then go open the box." At that moment, the jazz band stopped playing. A hush fell over the room as a spotlight swept across the floor. Landing on the head table, Marlene tapped a spoon against her glass, the sound sharp and piercing. "Everyone," she called out, her voice amplified by a microphone she had materialized from somewhere. "If I could have your attention, please." Grant stepped up beside her, buttoning his jacket, composing his face into a mask of humble gratitude. "It is time for the speeches." A woman near me whispered, "No," I thought, gripping the leather handle of the box until my knuckles turned white. "It is time for the audit." I took a step forward, moving out of the shadows and into the light. The black box felt heavy, not with paper, but with justice. I was ready. The microphone gave a sharp squeal of feedback, a piercing electronic shriek that silenced the room more effectively than any gavel. Marlene winced, adjusting the stand with a manicured hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light of the chandelier. She laughed, a nervous, trilling sound that bounced off the high ceilings. "Technical difficulties," she joked, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the ballroom. "Just like life, right? You plan for perfection, and you get a little feedback." The crowd chuckled dutifully. They were well trained. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, Reuben like a granite statue beside me. I did not move. I did not fidget with my clutch. I did not look down at my shoes. I practiced the stillness I had learned in deposition rooms, the kind of absolute lack of motion that makes guilty people start talking just to fill the void. Marlene scanned the room, her eyes glazing over me before snapping back to the center of the crowd where the wealthiest guests were gathered. 20 years, she began, her tone shifting into the rehearsed cadence of a Hallmark movie. "Grant and I have built this life for 20 years. It has not always been easy. We have weathered storms. We have faced challenges." She paused for effect. This was the setup. I knew it. In a fraud investigation. This is called the framing. You create a narrative of hardship to justify the embezzlement that comes later. "We have had to make hard choices," Marlene continued, her voice dropping to a brave whisper, "especially when it comes to family. Everyone here knows that Grant took on a lot when he married me. He did not just take a wife, he took on a household. He took on responsibilities that were not his own." Grant, standing a step behind her, nodded solemnly. He looked like a general accepting a medal for a war he had started. "And we tried," Marlene said, looking directly at the table where Bob Miller and the other investors were sitting. "We gave everything. We gave support. We gave money. We gave love. But sometimes," she sighed, a tragic sound, "sometimes you have to let people go. You have to stop enabling them. You have to let the bird fly, even if that bird refuses to flap its wings." The room was silent. Everyone knew who the bird was. The metaphor was as subtle as a brick through a window. "It broke my heart," Marlene said, pressing a hand to her chest. "To watch a child, my own child, struggle to find her way. To watch her reject our guidance. To watch her choose a path of dependency." She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. 60 pairs of eyes shifted toward me. They expected to see shame. They expected to see me crying or blushing or looking for an exit. Instead, they saw me staring at my mother with a faint, clinical interest. I looked like a biologist observing a specimen in a petri dish. My lack of reaction unsettled them. A woman near me shifted her weight. Looking away, the silence stretched too long. It wasn't the sympathetic silence Marlene wanted. It was the awkward, heavy silence of a joke that didn't land. Grant sensed the energy shift. He stepped up to the microphone, placing a heavy hand on Marlene's shoulder. He needed to regain control. He needed to look like the alpha male, the provider, the man who made hard decisions for the good of the tribe. "What Marlene is trying to say," Grant boomed, his voice too loud, "is that we are proud of where we are today. We built this from nothing. We didn't ask for handouts. We didn't wait for someone else to pay our bills." He looked directly at me then. His eyes were hard, glassy with adrenaline and scotch. "We believe in hard work," Grant said. "We believe in earning your keep. We tried to instill those values in this family. But let us be honest, some people just aren't built for work. Some people prefer the easy road. Some people like to live off the sweat of others." The insult hung in the air, toxic and undeniable. A man standing near Reuben, a local car dealership owner with a red face and a loose tie, leaned in. He thought he was being funny. He thought he was joining the winning team. "Must be heavy lifting, son," the man whispered to Reuben, loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "Carrying a dead weight like that for 10 years. Does your back hurt?" Reuben turned his head slowly. He looked at the man with a gaze that was terrifyingly void of anger. It was the look of a man who could dismantle the other person without raising his pulse. "My wife is not a weight," Reuben said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the distinct, crisp diction of command. "She is the engine. We are partners. I suggest you worry about your own back." The man blinked, his smile faltering. He took a step back, muttering an apology that no one heard. Marlene saw the exchange. She saw that her narrative was cracking. Reuben wasn't playing the role of the exhausted victim. I wasn't playing the role of the shamed daughter. We were standing there, united, wealthy, and unbothered. It infuriated her. She leaned into the microphone, abandoning the script. The veneer of the pained mother cracked, revealing the vicious, cornered narcissist underneath. "It is nice that you can stand there and defend her, Reuben," Marlene said sharply, her voice echoing off the walls. "It is easy to be a partner when you are spending someone else's money. But Grant and I know the truth. We know who paid the tuition. We know who paid the rent. We know who drained this family dry before she finally found someone new to latch onto." She pointed a finger at me, a long, accusatory talon. "You can wear the expensive dress, Clara," she spat. "You can pretend you are a success. But you and I both know what you really are. You are what you have always been, a freeloader." The word hit the room like a gunshot. Freeloader. People gasped. A waiter dropped a fork, the metal clatter sounding absurdly loud in the sudden vacuum of sound. This was not country club etiquette. This was a street fight in a ballroom. Grant saw the opportunity to deliver the killing blow. He saw the black box I was holding, the box I had placed on the corner of the head table when we first walked in. The box I had reclaimed during their speech. He grabbed the box from the table and shoved it toward me. It slid across the white tablecloth, stopping inches from the edge. "We do not want it," Grant sneered. "Whatever cheap apology is in there, we do not want your guilt offering. Take it, take your husband, and get out of my house." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight. The air conditioning vents seemed to stop blowing. The jazz band was frozen, instruments in laps. Then, the movement started. It was subtle at first, a hand reaching into a tuxedo pocket, a clutch snapping open, the soft blue glow of screens lighting up faces in the dim room. The phones were coming out. The guests smelled blood. They smelled scandal. This was no longer a party. It was a viral moment waiting to happen. They wanted to record the expulsion. They wanted to capture the exact moment the freeloader was thrown out by her heroic parents. I looked at the phones. I looked at Grant, whose face was flushed with triumph. I looked at Marlene, whose chest was heaving with the exertion of her malice. And then, I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate curving of my lips. It was the smile I gave when a CEO handed me a falsified ledger, thinking I wouldn't check the footnotes. I stepped forward. I did not take the box to leave. I placed my hand on the leather lid. You are right, Grant, I said. I didn't need a microphone. The room was so quiet that my voice projected perfectly. I should not have brought a gift if you feel that way, I continued. But since you brought up the tuition, since you brought up the rent, since you brought up the concept of earning your keep, I tapped the lid of the box with my index finger. I think the guests might be confused. You called me a freeloader. You said I drained the family. That is a serious accusation. It implies a debt. Marlene's eyes narrowed. Go away. Clara, you are embarrassing yourself. Am I asked. Because from where I am standing, it looks like you are the one afraid of what is in this box. I looked at Bob Miller, the investor. I made direct eye contact. Bob, I said, you are a businessman. You understand due diligence. If someone calls you a thief, you open your books, right? You show the receipts. Bob Miller blinked, surprised to be addressed. He nodded slowly, instinctively. That is right. Exactly, I said. To clear my name and to make sure everyone here knows exactly who owes what to whom, I think I should open this, right now. I moved my hand to the latch. Marlene realized it then. She realized this wasn't a peace offering. She realized it wasn't a check she could quietly cash later. She saw the cold, hard intelligence in my eyes, and panic surged through her. No, she shrieked. It was an ugly sound. Stripped of all social grace, she lunged forward, her hand reaching out to slap the box away. Do not you dare, security, get her out. Grant moved too, stepping around the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Do not touch that box. Clara, I forbid it. But before they could reach me, a figure stepped out from the crowd. It was Evelyn Carter. She moved with a speed that belied her age. She stepped into the gap between me and my parents, planting her feet firmly. She didn't look like a retired union treasurer. She looked like a wall. Back off, Marlene, Evelyn said. Her voice was low, but it had the steel of a woman who had negotiated labor contracts with angry men for 30 years. Marlene skidded to a halt, shocked. Evelyn, get out of the way. This is family business. You made it public business when you used that microphone, Evelyn said. She turned to look at the crowd, then back at Marlene. You called the girl a freeloader in front of half the town, if you are telling the truth. You have nothing to fear from a box. Evelyn looked at me. She nodded. Open it, Clara, Evelyn said. The truth needs light. Let us see who really paid for this party. Grant lunged for me, reaching over Evelyn's shoulder. I said no. Reuben stepped in. He didn't shove Grant. He just caught Grant's wrist in midair. It was a simple motion, efficient and brutal in its restraint. He held Grant's hand there, suspended, staring into Grant's eyes until the older man flinched. Let her open the box. Grant, Reuben said softly. Unless you want to explain to these police officers why you are assaulting a guest, he gestured with his head toward the back of the room, where 2 off-duty officers hired as security were watching with keen interest. Grant froze. He pulled his arm back, rubbing his wrist. He looked at Bob Miller. He looked at the phones recording him. He was trapped. If he stopped me physically, he looked like a monster. If he let me open it, he feared what would come out. I didn't give him time to calculate a third option. Thank you, Evelyn, I said. I looked at my mother. You wanted a lesson in independence. Mom, here it is. I flipped the latch. The click sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I lifted the lid. The lid of the black leather box fell back with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silence of the ballroom. Inside, nestled in the black velvet lining, there were no diamonds. There were no pearls. There was no check made out to cash to save a failing business. There were only 2 things: a single tarnished brass key, the original key to the house on Pinecrest Lane, which I had kept on my keychain for 10 years, and a thick, bound document held together with a heavy blue legal clip. I reached in and took the document. I held it up. The overhead chandelier caught the embossed seal on the front page, making it shimmer. You asked me where I got the money, I said, my voice calm, projecting to the back of the room where the waiters had stopped clearing plates. You asked if I had to borrow it from my husband. You asked if I was still the girl who needed a handout. I turned the document so the cover page faced the crowd. This is a deed of assignment, I explained, using the same tone I used when presenting evidence to a grand jury. Specifically, an assignment of note and mortgage, 2 weeks ago, through my firm. I purchased a portfolio of distressed assets from a secondary lender in New York. I looked at Grant. His face had gone from red to a terrifying, chalky white. He knew what a distressed asset was. He knew exactly whose asset was distressed. Among those assets, I continued, was a non-performing loan collateralized by a residential property. The property is located at 4402 Pinecrest Lane. A gasp rippled through the room. It started with the real estate agents who understood the jargon instantly, and then it spread to the socialites as the realization hit. You bought the mortgage, a woman in the front row whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. I own the debt, I corrected. Technically, as of 14 days ago, I am the bank. I hold the note on the house you are sleeping in. Grant, I hold the note on the roof over your head. Mother. I let that sink in. The irony was a physical weight in the room. The couple who had just spent 10 minutes publicly shaming me for being a dependent, for being a freeloader, were actually living in a house that I effectively owned. They were the tenants. I was the landlord. You called me a freeloader, I said, my voice hardening. But for the last 6 months, you have not made a single payment on this house. You are 312 days delinquent, by all legal definitions. The only people living for free in that house are you. Marlene looked like she was going to faint. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles white. That is a lie. We refinanced. We have a deal. You had a deal with a predatory lender, I said. And they sold that deal to me. I flipped the page of the document. But here is the thing, I said, looking at the guests. I did not come here to evict them. I did not come here to foreclose. I pulled out a second document from the folder. It was a single page, stamped and notarized. This, I said, holding it up, is a deed of release. It is a forgiveness of debt. My plan, my original plan when I walked through those doors was to give this to you. I was going to hand you this piece of paper. Wipe out the $412,000 you still owe on the house and give you a fresh start. No strings attached. Just a gift from the daughter you said never gave you anything. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. The guests looked from me to Marlene. They saw the magnitude of the cruelty. I had walked in with a $500,000 lifeline, and they had met me with public humiliation. I wanted to prove that I was not the burden, I said softly. I wanted to prove that I could carry you. I placed the forgiveness document back in the box. I did not give it to them. But then, I said, I checked my email. I reached into the false bottom of the box, the secret compartment I had prepared. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the printout of the email from the Lakeview Hills Country Club event coordinator. You see, I said, turning to look at Bob Miller, the investor Grant had been trying to impress. Grant is right about one thing. He does have a silent partner, but it is not a voluntary one. I unfolded the email. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, I received a demand for payment for this party, I said. The total was $8,400. The credit card on file, Grant's card, was declined 3 times. Grant made a sound in his throat. A strangled protest. Clara, stop. The event coordinator contacted me. I continued, talking over him. Because my name was listed as the guarantor. My email was listed as the billing contact. Without asking me, without telling me. My mother and stepfather used my identity to book this venue. They used my name to secure the catering. They used my credit rating to rent this ballroom so they could stand on this stage and call me a failure. I held up the receipt. I paid it, I announced. I paid the $8,400, not because I wanted to support this lie, but because I wanted the receipt. I wanted proof. I looked at Marlene. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. No. It was a mistake. It was an administrative error. We never— Do not lie to me, Mother. I snapped. The force of my voice made her flinch. I am a forensic accountant. I trace lies for a living. I traced the IP address on the booking. It came from the computer in Grant's study, the same computer where you cropped me out of the family photos. I turned to the crowd. So, to answer the question about who is the freeloader, I am the one who bought the house. I am the one who paid for the food you are eating. I am the one paying for the champagne you are drinking. And the people standing on this stage, they are fraudsters who tried to steal my name because they ruined their own. Grant snapped. The humiliation was too much. The facade he had built for 20 years had shattered in less than 5 minutes. He let out a roar of inarticulate rage and lunged across the table. "Give me that!" he screamed, his face twisted into a mask of violence. "That is my property. You stole those files." He reached for the folder in my hand. His fingers brushed the paper, but he never closed his grip. Reuben moved. It was not a frantic motion. It was the precise, kinetic action of a man who had been waiting for this exact boundary to be crossed. He stepped between us, his hand clamping down on Grant's forearm. He didn't twist it. He didn't strike him. He just pressed Grant's hand down onto the table, hard, pinning it to the white tablecloth. "Do not," Reuben said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "That file contains evidence of bank fraud and identity theft," Reuben said, looking Grant in the eye. "Touching it is tampering with evidence, and touching her that is assault. Do you really want to add a violent felony to the list of charges we are compiling?" Grant stared at Reuben. He looked at the size of Reuben's hand on his arm. He looked at the guests, who were now standing, phones raised, capturing every second of his downfall. The fight went out of him. He slumped, pulling his arm back, defeated. "You ruined it," Grant whispered. "You ruined everything. You ruined it yourself," I said. 10 years ago, I wasn't done. There was one last piece of the truth that needed to be told. The money was the weapon, but the letter was the soul. I reached into the box for the final time. I pulled out the yellowed, fragile envelope that had sat in Aunt Renee's tackle box for a decade. "You told everyone that my father left us with nothing," I said to Marlene. "You told Evelyn. You told the town. You told me. You said Paul Watson was irresponsible." Marlene looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "He knew," I said. "He knew exactly who you were." I opened the letter. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the emotional resonance of reading his words in this room, filled with people who had forgotten him. "This is a letter my father wrote to me before he died," I said. "He left it with his sister because he was afraid. Listen to this." I began to read. "Clara, I love your mother, but fear makes her selfish. I am terrified that if I am not there to remind her of who she is, she will let the money change her. She will let the status change her. And I am terrified that she will see you not as her daughter, but as a competitor for the resources she thinks she needs to survive." I paused. The room was deathly silent. I could hear Marlene sobbing softly, a sound of genuine misery this time. "I am leaving you this money," I read, "not because I think you are weak, but because I know they will try to make you feel weak. They will try to take your legs out from under you. Do not let them. You are a Watson. You build things. You do not break them." I lowered the letter. "He predicted this," I said. "He predicted the greed. He predicted the abandonment. He predicted that you would try to steal my future to pay for your present." "That is a forgery," Grant shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Paul never wrote that. You wrote it yourself." "It is not a forgery," the voice came from the crowd. Evelyn Carter stepped forward again. She walked up to the edge of the dance floor, her posture rigid with indignation. "I worked with Paul Watson for 15 years, Evelyn said, addressing the room. I processed his paperwork every week. I know his handwriting better than I know my own husband's. She pointed at the letter in my hand. That is Paul's block print, she said. The way he crosses his T's, the way he loops his S's, and more importantly, that is Paul's voice. That is exactly how he talked about you. Marlene, he loved you, but he was scared to death of what you would become without him. Evelyn turned to the guests. The girl is telling the truth. Marlene and Grant have been lying about Paul's estate since the day he went into the ground. The validation was the final nail. The whispers in the room turned into a low roar of judgment. I saw Mrs. Higgins look at Marlene with open disgust. I saw Bob Miller put his phone in his pocket and signal to his wife that they were leaving. The social capital Marlene had hoarded for 20 years evaporated in 10 seconds. I looked at the black box. I looked at the mortgage forgiveness document, the paper that would have saved them. I picked it up. Marlene looked at it. Hope flared in her eyes. "Clara," she whispered, "please, we can fix this. We are family." "Family," I repeated. "You just stood there and watched him call me a freeloader. You just stood there and told 60 people that I was a burden. You used my name to pay for this party. That is not family. Mother, that is a parasite." I tore the document in half. The sound of the thick paper ripping was loud. Marlene screamed. "No!" I tore it again, and again. I ripped the forgiveness into confetti. I let the pieces fall onto the table, covering the untouched anniversary cake like snow. "I am not giving you the house," I said. "I am keeping the debt. You have 30 days to bring the mortgage current, or I will begin foreclosure proceedings. You will pay me every single cent you owe. You will learn, finally, what it means to earn your keep." I closed the box. I snapped the latch shut. "I did not come here to ask for your love," I said. "I came here to give you a choice. You chose the lie. Now you can pay the price." I turned to Reuben. "We are done." "We are done." He agreed. He offered me his arm. I took it. We turned our backs on the head table, on the weeping woman in the silver dress, on the ruined man in the tuxedo. We walked toward the exit, cutting a path through the stunned crowd, but as we reached the doors, Grant made one last, desperate attempt to regain control. He didn't attack me physically this time. He tried to attack my conscience. "You can't do this," he shouted after me. "We are your parents. You owe us respect. You are nothing without us." I stopped. I didn't turn around. I just pulled the brass key, the key to the house, out of my pocket. I tossed it over my shoulder. It hit the parquet floor with a high, clear ring. "I am everything without you," I said without looking back. "And now, you are nothing without me." We walked out into the cool night air. Behind us, the ballroom erupted into chaos, but I didn't hear it. All I heard was the sound of my own heels clicking on the pavement, steady, rhythmic, and free. We had not even reached the valet stand when the service door to the right of the main entrance burst open. Grant stumbled out, breathless, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his face a map of ruin. He did not lunge at me this time. He did not shout. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn down and was trying to save a single photograph from the ash. He reached out, not to grab me, but to block my path. "Clara," he wheezed, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Please, just wait. We cannot leave it like this. Think about the optics." "The optics?" I asked, stopping on the plush red carpet of the lobby. "I think the optics are perfectly clear. Grant, you are a tenant, I am the bank, and rent is due on the 1st. Come inside," he begged, gesturing toward a small, private bridal suite off the hallway. "Just for 5 minutes. No audience, no cameras, just family. We can work this out. I can make it right." Reuben looked at me. He gave a subtle nod. It was the nod of a man who knew that a wounded animal is dangerous, but one that needs to be put out of its misery. 5 minutes, I said. "But if you raise your voice, Grant, I am calling the police to report the identity theft regarding the catering bill. Grant nodded frantically. No police. Just talk. We stepped into the small room. It was lined with mirrors, designed for brides to check their makeup before walking down the aisle. It was a fitting place for the final stripping away of my mother's vanity. Marlene followed us in a moment later. She looked small. The silver sequins that had seemed so armor-like under the ballroom lights now looked cheap and gaudy. Her mascara was running in dark rivets down her cheeks. Grant closed the door. He turned to me, and the transformation was instant. The bully was gone. In his place was the salesman, the con artist trying to close the hardest deal of his life. Okay, Grant said, clasping his hands together. Okay, you made your point. Clara, you won. That was a hell of a show. Bob Miller is never going to return my calls again. Are you happy? I am not happy, I said. I am accurate. There is a difference. Look, Grant said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I know we have had our differences. I know I was hard on you, but that was just motivation. I wanted you to be tough. And look at you. You are a killer. You bought the mortgage. That is brilliant. Truly brilliant. He paused, waiting for me to accept the compliment. I stared at him with the warmth of a glacier. Here is the proposal, Grant continued, undeterred by my silence. I will go back out there. I will get on that microphone. I will tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will apologize publicly. I will say you are the savior of this family. I will give you all the credit. He extended a hand, palm up. In exchange, he said, you sign a new copy of that forgiveness deed. You wipe the debt. We keep the house. We forget the catering bill happened. Clean slate. You get the reputation of a saint, and we get to keep our home. Win-win. I looked at Marlene. She was watching me with desperate hope, dabbing her eyes with a cocktail napkin. Is that what you want? Mother, I asked, you want me to save you again. It is the right thing to do. Marlene sniffed. We are your parents. Clara, you cannot just throw us on the street. What would people say? People are already saying plenty, I replied. I walked over to a small vanity table and placed the black box down. You think this is about the house, I said. You think this is about money. That is your mistake. It has always been about the lie. I opened the box again. I reached past the compartment where the mortgage papers had been. I pressed a small, hidden catch on the inside edge of the box. The false bottom popped up with a soft click. Grant froze. He knew, instinctively, that whatever was in the bottom of that box was worse than debt. I pulled out a single, thin file. This, I said, is a forensic credit analysis. I ran it 3 days ago. I opened the file and pulled out a sheet covered in highlighted rows. You said you were hard on me for my own good, I said to Grant. You called me a freeloader. But according to this, on October 14th, 10 years ago, the day you kicked me out, someone applied for a $20,000 personal loan using my social security number. Marlene gasped. She looked at Grant. And here, I pointed to another line. 3 years ago, a credit card application, denied, and here, last month, the car loan. I looked up. You were not teaching me independence, I said. You were trying to harvest my identity. You were trying to turn me into a ghost so you could wear my skin. That is circumstantial, Grant sputtered, though sweat was now pouring down his temples. You cannot prove who filled out those forms. I can, I said. I reached into the box one last time. I pulled out the USB drive, the small, gray piece of plastic that my father had taped to the bottom of a tackle box. You thought Paul was stupid, I said to Marlene. You thought he was just a blue-collar worker who didn't understand how the world worked. But Paul saw you. I held up the drive. There is a voice recording on this drive, I said. I am not going to play the whole thing for you. I do not think you deserve to hear his voice, but I will tell you what he says at the 4-minute mark. I looked Grant dead in the eye. He says, I came home early today and found Grant in my office. He was looking for the deed to the house. He told me he was looking for a pen. But when he left, the insurance folder was moved. If I die, Clara, check the dates, check the signatures. Grant is writing checks before the money is even in the account. The silence in the bridal suite was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Marlene made a sound like a wounded animal. She turned to Grant, her eyes wide with horror. "You touched his papers," she whispered. "Before he died. You told me you only helped me afterward." "He is lying," Grant shouted, pointing at the USB drive. "That is a fake deepfake AI, whatever they use now." "It was recorded 12 years ago, Grant," I said coldly. "Technology has come a long way, but it hasn't invented a time machine for your conscience." I turned to my mother. "He didn't just steal from me, Mom," I said. "He stole from you. He stole your grief. He turned your husband's death into a payday. And you let him. You were so afraid of being alone, so afraid of being poor, that you let a wolf into the house and helped him eat your own daughter." Marlene sank onto the small vanity stool. She covered her face with her hands. She wept. But this time, there was no audience to perform for. There were no guests to pity her. There was just the cold, hard reflection of her own choices in the mirrors surrounding us. "I am sorry," she sobbed. "Clara, please, I didn't know." "You knew enough," I said. "You knew I was sleeping in a laundry room. You knew I was eating ramen while you went on cruises. You knew." Grant realized the negotiation was over. He switched tactics. He bared his teeth. "Fine," he snarled. "You have your little recording. You have your debt. Go ahead. Foreclose. I will drag it out in court for 5 years. I will sue you for defamation. I will say you hacked my computer. I will ruin your precious reputation." I looked at Reuben. He stepped forward and handed me a pen. "You can try," I said. "But I do not think you want the police to hear this drive, or see the IP logs for the catering fraud." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the back of the file. I placed it on the vanity table next to the black box. "Here is the deal," I said. "This is not a forgiveness of debt. This is a confession of judgment." Grant looked at the paper, his eyes narrowing. "It states that you admit to the attempted identity theft," I explained. "It states that you admit to the fraudulent booking of the event tonight, and it includes a permanent restraining order preventing you from ever contacting me, my husband, or my business again." "I am not signing that," Grant spat. "It is an admission of guilt." "It is," I agreed. "But here's the trade. You sign this, and I keep the USB drive in the box. I do not go to the district attorney. I do not file criminal charges for the catering fraud. You stay out of prison." "And the house?" Marlene asked, looking up. Her mascara smeared like war paint. "The house is a separate issue," I said. "If I sign this," Grant said, his voice trembling with rage, "you walk away. You leave us alone." "If you sign this," I said, "I promise I will never speak to you again, which, honestly, is the greatest gift I could give myself." Grant looked at the paper. He looked at Reuben, who was standing by the door like a sentinel. He looked at the USB drive in my hand. He knew he was checkmated. He snatched the pen. He scribbled his signature on the line with a violence that nearly tore the paper. "There," he said, throwing the pen down. "Take it, and go to hell." "I have already been there," I said, picking up the paper. "You were the landlord." I checked the signature. It was valid. I handed the paper to Reuben, who folded it and placed it in his inside jacket pocket. "Now," I said, turning to the door, "about the house." "You said you were not foreclosing," Marlene pleaded. "I am not," I said. "I am too busy to manage a property in North Carolina. I do not want your rent checks. I do not want your emails." I opened the door. The sounds of the chaotic ballroom drifted in. "So," I said, looking back at them one last time, "I am assigning the note. I am transferring the ownership of the debt to a new lender, someone local, someone who has plenty of time to ensure you follow the rules." "Who?" Grant demanded. "Aunt Renee," I said. Marlene's face went white. Renee, you are giving the mortgage to Renee. She has always wanted to be more involved in family matters, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. She is very strict about payments. Grant, I would not be late if I were you. She has a way of holding grudges. I walked out. I heard Marlene scream my name, a sound of pure despair, but I did not stop. Reuben put his arm around my shoulders, a heavy, grounding weight. We walked through the lobby, past the stunned guests who were still whispering near the entrance. They parted for us like the Red Sea. They did not look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I wasn't the freeloader. I was the one who had settled the tab. We stepped out into the night. The air was cool and clean. The valet brought our car around. As I sat in the passenger seat, my phone began to buzz. Bzzzt, bzzzt, bzzzt. It was Marlene, then Grant, then a number I didn't recognize, probably a guest wanting the scoop, then a local reporter. The screen lit up the dark car. Reuben looked at it. Do you want to answer? I looked at the names flashing on the screen. The people who had ignored me for 10 years. The people who only wanted me when I was useful or scandalous. I pressed the power button. I held it down until the screen went black. No, I said. Not every call is worth picking up. We drove in silence for a long time. The country club faded into the distance, a glowing ship of fools sinking into the night. 2 days later, I sat in a small kitchen in Pittsburgh. It smelled of bacon grease and stale smoke, just as it had 10 years ago. Renee sat across from me. She was holding the legal documents I had prepared, the assignment of mortgage, the keys to the house on Pinecrest Lane. She looked at the papers, then at me. Her eyes were wet. You are sure about this? Kid, she asked. That is a lot of money you are handing over, the monthly payments alone. It is not about the money, I said. It is about the balance. Grant took from this family. Now he can pay you back, every single month, for 20 years. Renee let out a bark of laughter that sounded like a cough. She lit a cigarette, her hand shaking slightly. Oh, he is going to hate that, she grinned. He is going to hate writing that check to me. That is the point, I said. I reached out and placed my hand on the empty black box that sat between us. It was light now. The evidence was gone. The burden was gone. Thank you, I said to Renee, for keeping the letter. For keeping the promise. Paul would be proud, Renee said. You did good. Clara, you built the tank. I did, I said. I looked around the small, cluttered kitchen. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a ballroom, but it was warm. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged. I had opened the gift box, and I had found the only thing that mattered. I had found my way out. Thank you so much for listening to Clara's story of vindication and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a quiet kitchen like Renee's? Or maybe on a long drive like Clara's journey to freedom? Please leave a comment below with your location and your thoughts on how Clara handled her family. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Juliet Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share more stories of truth and triumph with the world.